So good morning. Hi, Nadia. Welcome to
Hey,
TNP Fridays.
Tom.
Let me show you our fancy title on the screen. You see that?
Okay,
Cool,
I
right?
see it.
Um,
We are supposed to actually be in Nantucket right now.
I know. It's the day today. It's supposed to start today.
I know.
That's
I'm
amazing.
kind of devastated. I mean, I've texted you a few times, like, I'm so sad.
I know, and I appreciate it. And as I think I said to you, there's a bit of relief in it.
Of course.
I know what
yeah,
I'd be
it's
going
relentless.
through right now.
Totally.
So Nadia, I'm going to roll and run our new intro. That's the new intro. And
Nice.
so TNP Fridays, let me just give you a second of background. It's we have a TNP Mondays and a TNP Fridays at our company. We all get together on Mondays and Fridays, and that's what we call it. And this show, Gather, Wonder, Practice, I'll keep talking about that, but that's really those are the pillars of what we do. We gather, wonder is about learning, and practice is about, becoming more healthy as an individual and a community. And gathering and wondering are critically two of those practices. Nadia, on our team, we think of you as one of our family. You've always been very generous with us, but also have a very important voice. And, you're among an interesting group of people who have won our audience award too. So we have a lot of history. It's funny because today I started doing some research on you that I had never done before. So I'm going to give you some highlights that I didn't know about. And before I do that, I'll just say, I think what you do best is you have a powerful perspective and you communicate it well, right? Not all of us, I know I can speak for myself. Sometimes my perspective is like pretty boring or pretty much like I'm just following the rules. And then sometimes I have an interesting perspective and sometimes I can't communicate it well. I think you do both of those things really well. There's a lot, I think, that probably brings that out in you. We're actually going to talk about that today. But, okay, let's start there. I mean, one is you're very open about your sobriety and some of the struggles you had in the past. You and I share that in common. You probably are, well, you're a more public person than I am, but I think you're a little bit more public with that part of you maybe than I am. And then the other thing is, because of that, I think when I look at you have what you call just house. Do you call it the house or house? No, you're no longer there, but did you call it?
No. Yeah, we call it house.
House, yeah. Which was the, all sinners and saints, the house for all sinners and saints. That was is a Denver-based church that I think celebrates the less celebrated, but the always deserved of celebration. Meaning it always has been. That's not new. It has always been deserved of it. You just brought that out. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it feels obvious to me, but maybe not obvious to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that part of it, the other thing you called for women to send their purity rings to be melted down into a vagina sculpture. Didn't know that. I liked it.
Which I gave to Gloria Steinem on stage at an event. Yeah.
Wow. And so Nadia is also.
Well, okay,
there's
this verse in Isaiah that talks about that it's actually on the outside of the UN, that sculpture, that statue outside the UN, and it says that we will beat our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks in Isaiah. And so to invite women to mail me their purity rings to be melted into a sculpture of a vagina was just my sort of iteration of taking that which has harmed us and repurposing it into something that can heal us.
Yeah. It's so good. And it's, when I think of, like a lot of people, I try to identify and personalize some of what we're talking about here. And I look at my own sort of, call them my list of sins, the things I'm ashamed of, more and less, depending on my overall mental health, spiritual health. And I remember one time at TNP, one of the things you said was I'm not that impressed. It wasn't to me, but which was basically an acknowledgement that this person's sins were just like, run of the mill. And we say it out loud a lot, but every human is a sinner, as defined by sort of the, right? Is that a fair statement?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think you have to then sort of define what you mean by that, just because that idea has been weaponized by Christianity specifically in some really pernicious ways. But I use the definition, if you're going to talk about sin, the British writer Francis Spufford wrote a book called Unapologetic. I read it every year. It's one of my favorite books. And he defines sin as the human propensity to fuck things up. Now, if that's what you're calling it, then of course we all share it. If it's not a sort of like, oh, the people who indulge in the naughty list of behaviors, if that's not going to be our definition of sin, which obviously it shouldn't be. But if you just define it as the human propensity to fuck things up, then yeah, of course we all share that. And then one of my great interests is, okay, if that's true, and I would propose it is true, then what do we do with that? What do we do with those stories of the times when we fucked things up? What do we do with the part of our personal narrative that includes words and actions that have caused harm to people we love, or that we feel really deeply shameful about? So I think one of the things that I am constantly thinking of is, how do we metabolize those moments in our lives? How do we keep them from having more gravity than they should? How do we sort of own up to our stuff, speak it out loud, and then deal with it?
Yeah. I mentioned that in the context of your church, which is what led me there, because some of what we're describing, just so we all, I think we all agree on this. The church was made by man. Man made all the, if you read the Sermon on the Mount, like Jesus had a certain plan, and man blew a fair amount of that off. Now, at the same time, if you read the Old Testament, which I read every day, just to be clear, I read a book that is the New and Old Testament that is divided into 365 parts, and I've been reading it for a couple of years now, so I'm always reading it. One thing I can tell you for sure is that there's a whole bunch of rules in there that no human keeps. I can't imagine there's a human on earth that keeps all those goddamn rules. Like, I doubt many people are cutting lambs in half these days, right?
Right. It's impossible. Yep.
But I just want everyone to know, like, when you think about a sin, like, we as a culture pick out sins and feature them as like the bad ones. But it doesn't say that in the Old or New Testament, that here's the bad ones and here's the okay ones, and this one's a 9 and this one's a 3. They just kind of list a lot of them.
But we sort of rank them that way.
We do that.
I mean, yeah. Okay. So here's the thing about if keeping all of the rules perfectly is the sort of spiritual goal, there are a million setups to that, right? Because nobody can actually do it perfectly, any of that. Now, when I say it, now you could mean, all the rules in the Bible, or you could mean being the most perfect vegan, or you could mean the person who uses the most up-to-date social justice language every day of their life and never, you know what I mean? I mean, we set up purity systems all the time, right? But the thing is when we're under that, when we're under the pressure of that, there's only 2 options, neither of which are great: pride or despair. So either when the whole thing is about earning my worth, about being righteous or pious or good or social justice-y or whatever, if that's the whole deal, if that's the game, then either I'm so prideful because I'm nailing it and you're not, or I'm despairing because you're nailing it and I'm not. But I don't see much freedom in either one of those things.
No. It's funny, and we'll talk about this briefly because I want to talk about what you're doing, but, we just did this trip down the Mississippi, and we did a lot of events about race. And there's no doubt that fear pervades. And a lot of the fear is based on what you just said, which is there are all these rules of things you can and can't do. And you don't want to offend anybody, and you don't want to look like the bad guy, right? Now, I got more comfortable with that over time. and more comfortable just in the sense that some of my fear subsided. These issues still come up every night. And the bottom line, like the one thing I think perhaps me or I and some of people on my team brought to the table was just the forum. That's it. The rest of it, like the real stuff, the real powerful stuff, was really a dance around what you're saying. It was a dance around like, in what part am I too prideful and too despairing, and where might my generosity, my humility offer something, which by the way, could include some suffering, because you're getting new information that's making you question sort of like your own participation in something you may view as less than healthy now in a new way.
You're talking around issues of race, especially white people dealing with issues.
Yes,
of race.
mostly white, but black too. I mean, you would see issues come up, and by the way, we had lots of mixes, primarily black and white, but lots of mixes. But yeah.
Well, this is why at the height of the protests, when there was a lot of kind of virtue signaling, online, and having to say the right words and make the right statements and stuff. Not that that's totally bad or wrong, but at the height of that, I always ask myself a very particular discernment question, which is, what's mine to do and what's not mine to do? Or what's mine to say and what's not mine to say? And I probably use that question for myself on a daily basis, I would say. And so when that was going on, I was trying to figure out what's mine to say. And so I wrote a pastoral letter to other white people, like having a pastoral response to this moment, and to go, look, I see you, and I see that that it feels horrible to realize how much you didn't know, especially when you thought you knew stuff, right? I see I see the difficulty of this. And my encouragement to keep going, to keep learning, to keep changing for us isn't so that we can meet the new standard of what it looks like to be good, but so that we can actually experience more freedom and more flourishing ourselves, because we're so deeply connected to the freedom and flourishing of other people. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's such a lie that somehow I have to protect my own interests so that I'm okay. But if that is harming someone else, that's also harming me because of our connectedness. And so I just believe, just in my own story, and I'm a beginner with this stuff, like a lot of us are, but in my story, the more I've learned, the more I've had really close friendships with people who are not white, who I talk to on a regular basis, that I'm close to. There's a vibrancy to life when you step outside of the bonds of whiteness. And it's something I want for all of us. There's a flourishing there. There's a vibrancy there. And there are ways that we are kind of controlled by things culturally that we can't even see. But once you see them and you step out, there's more freedom. And I'm in it for the freedom.
Yeah,
really.
That's beautiful. And I think it's, let's go back to your church. It is true that if you read the New Testament, if you're a Christian, or if you're not, the parables of Jesus, just, you look who he hung around. You look how he treated people. You look how he interacted with people. And, if Nadia was putting up the vagina statue in the square, Jesus wouldn't be like, oh, you suck. He would probably come over and hug you and get to know you and talk to you, and right? Just to be clear, that's what this guy was. So it seems. I mean, that's how it's written anyway. That's what I believe. And I think that's true in the ways you just said, which is to say there's like a celebration and a beauty in it. And I felt that because I did this trip twice this summer. So I did almost 12,000 miles in a car this summer and a motorcycle. And so what am I missing? I'm missing my family for sure. And I'm missing some of the recreational things I would normally do in the summer. And I had this realization at one point where I thought, man, I have been working my ass off for day after day after day doing really intense stuff. But I felt joy. Joy amidst a lot of pain. Joy amidst a lot of struggle and awkwardness. And I thought, I'm not missing anything. I'm not missing anything. I'm actually happier than I was last summer.
Yeah, because joy is seldom found in the pursuit of comfort. It's found in risk. It's found in what happens on the other side of pain. It happens in, it catches us by surprise when we're in a moment of openness or vulnerability. But what we think is, I'll be happy if I just pursue all of my making sure all my preferences are met and making sure I'm as comfortable as possible. That's not necessarily a recipe for joy. I feel tremendous joy after I've just cried my eyes out. That moment where you're with somebody and you can drop in emotionally and really feel sorrow or loss, and then I'll have this great cry, and then that moment when you start laughing after that is incredible. And it doesn't come without the first part.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right, Nadia, I want to take a turn towards some of the work you're doing now and some of the work you're going to be doing soon. Quickly before we do, so if you see this is you at TNP. One of the things you did at TNP, which I want to acknowledge as we sort of dive in here, I call it crossing the J barrier, which is you sort of made it okay to talk about Jesus at TNP. It's it's out of favor amongst, I'm going to just generalize and I apologize, but East Coast elites. You can talk about.
Sure. I have a puppy that I'm going to have to hold while we're talking, or else she's going to yell at me the whole time.
Okay.
So hold on.
Okay.
All right, baby. Come on. All right.
So, you can talk about.
This is Gertrude Stein.
Say the name again.
Gertrude Stein.
What's the name?
Gertrude Stein.
Oh, Gertrude Stein. That's a mouthful too. Gertrude Stein.
I call her Gertie. Yeah. Okay.
So
I crossed the J barrier.
You crossed the J barrier, and the irony being that it's just not okay to talk about that. It's not written anywhere, by the way, but just generally, it's not okay to talk about that. And by the way, that doesn't mean we don't talk about other religions. We just don't talk about that religion. We haven't historically. Now, you sort of brought us across that line, which I think is healthy and right. And among the things that I think is interesting about it is that,
Okay, but hold on. But then you yanked everyone else across the line, because the next year you're like, would you just preach a sermon?
Well, that is true. But here's the thing, right? The Judeo-Christian world is massive, and we live in it. Now, we live in a more diverse culture than that. Of course we do. But the Judeo-Christian part of it is really big, just based on numbers, but also based on so many cultural norms that we deal with. And a lot of that is contained in two books, the Old and New Testament, like 2,000-year-old books or more. In the case of the Old Testament, more like 3,000. So I think it's relevant. Like, we should talk about it in the midst of everything else we talk about. I don't know how you leave that out. So thank you for bringing us there. And I think it's also really powerful when people observe other, so what you hear is it's personal, right? People say, well, this is personal. Have you heard the things people talk about on our stage? You tell me that other stuff's not personal? Addiction, mental issues. Like, we talk about personal things. Right. So I'm okay talking about this too.
Right. I think the hesitation for people comes from, the way that Christianity specifically has been weaponized against people, and people don't want it. You don't want to be told, look, if you don't accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, you're going to spend eternity in hell. That's first of all, heresy. Second of all, a huge bummer. Nobody wants that. Yeah. I don't want somebody sitting in judgment of me or telling me that I'm going to burn in some eternal torment because of the fact that I happen to be queer, or, geez, no wonder. Look, when people don't want to have anything to do with Christianity, I don't blame them. But to your point, at TMP, people tell me their stories all the time. They come up to me and tell me, hey, I was raised Catholic, but when my mom finally left our abusive dad, the church wouldn't give her communion anymore, so I can't have anything to do with it. Or they'll say, well, I was raised Methodist, but when my brother came out as gay, we were shunned, and screw that. I've never had somebody come up and go, well, I was raised Christian, but then I just realized that Jesus guy doesn't really have much to offer, so I bailed. Like, it's never Jesus. People are generally fine with Jesus. They may or may not believe he was, the second member of the Trinity, but they're pretty cool with who he was and what he taught. And so I think it's just important to recognize that. And people, the other thing is that I don't think people leave the church because Jesus bums them out. I think people leave the church because they actually believe in what Jesus is teaching so much that they can't stomach being part of an institution that says it's about that and clearly isn't.
Yeah, and a lot of what you just defined, going back to what we said before, is that is unfortunately the nature of man. The nature of man being we're going to ebb and flow on the degree to which we corrupt certain things based on our human instincts. And here's the thing I'll say about that is I'm not saying that to say, oh, man sucks. I am saying that to say, well, man has to deal with some complicated issues, and on a regular basis, to the extent that you're not, by the way, this is going to be a good segue, to the extent that you're not healthy, you sometimes make bad decisions that impact other people in a way that's not healthy. I've done that in my life. There's things I've done that make me feel bad towards my family, towards my friends, et cetera, right? We've all done that. And it's often when I'm in a state that is not the healthiest, and my practices aren't healthy, et cetera. So I'm going to show you one thing, and just as a backdrop of, for the conversation. So if you could see this. So this is what we're calling Kaleida. And when we say, by the way, I'll get rid of this crass commercial message in 1 second, but gather, wonder, practice is what we're about. Gather and wonder, I think you know what that is. That's learning and getting together and having powerful conversations or witnessing things as a group. The last one being practice. This is, think of this, if you know what Strava is, which is a place where you enter like how many miles you ran today and how many sit-ups you did. This is just a general way to log in and look at these 9 practices, and I'll share them quickly. Conversation is one of the critical ones. Intention, setting intentions, gratitude, reflection, mindfulness, think meditation, body, a healthy body, eating, exercising. Community, we're changing the name of this one to neighborhood. Wonder, learning, humble learning, and then service. So that's a new part of what we do. And it comes from a whole variety of places, but the idea is let's have healthy practices together so we can make better choices, like not build a church to make me rich, or a church that has these rules because it'll make it easier so I can control people. I'm generalizing here. I'm not pointing a finger at anybody.
Well, but everything that you just had on that screen, I feel like a lot of those needs in the human being for flourishing were historically met through religion.
Yes.
Of some
yeah,
sort.
They were.
Human beings have always been religious. There's no society that you can point to in history that didn't fashion religion in some variety. And the reason is because it's an innate need that we have to have symbols for and access the transcendent, the divine, to gather, to mark the year in particular ways, to have ways of knowing who we are, to have an origin story, to have ways to pray and meditate, music, all of these things, gathering for feasts. These were things that historically happened within the container we now call religion. And the Enlightenment was great. It gave us some wonderful things. But Charles Taylor said it gave with one hand and stole with the other. And so I'm always aware of what are the needs within the human being that have always been met by religion that might be unmet or met poorly right now. And how do we see that and meet those needs for one another, even if we aren't going to intellectually assent to the same theological propositions? So I feel like a lot of what was on that screen addresses that. And that's why I do the work I do. Like, if I'm going to speak at TMP, I'm thinking, what is the most pastoral thing I can say to these people? Do they believe in the same things about Jesus as I do? Maybe some of them, most probably not. Does it matter? No, because I am a pastor. That's what I do. So I'm always thinking that no matter who I'm talking to. And that's why, I know you wanted to talk about the confessional. That's why I started that project. Is another thing that religion has met in us is the need to confess, the need to sort of metabolize the more shadowy parts of our story and ourselves and our psyche, and then also to receive a blessing. Because where do you receive a blessing if you don't have a priest? If there's not, what do we substitute? Like our Instagram likes now? Is that what we're seeking when we're seeking that? Is the need to receive a blessing?
It's last night I watched a film called The Social Dilemma, which I'm going to recommend to everybody. It's sort of like the all-stars of the people I'm really into in this world. Jonathan Haidt's in it. Tristan Harris is in it. Shoshana Zuboff is in it. Like all these people, Jaron Lanier is in it. And it's really about the challenge of what the internet / social media has brought. And to your point earlier, giveth with one hand and taketh with the other. This is a really big one of those. Like this is like, it is in some part a gift, and it is in some part a really, really challenging and difficult and scary thing. The film does a nice job of outlining that. But yeah, I did want to, let me bring that up. So the confessional, to me, this is a podcast that Nadia launched in the beginning of the year. Am I right? Wasn't it in the beginning of the year?
In April.
And to me, it is at least two things on that graphic I showed you, and it is an act of service. It is also an act of conversation and neighborhood. Like you're gathering with other people. Ideally to perform a service and to create a community that is a path towards, I'm going to use your word, flourishing. And the notion is that you why don't you describe the premise of the show?
Yeah. So, I think we have plenty of occasions to be dazzled by people's virtues and accomplishments in media. There's lots of opportunities to be impressed by their filtered lives. But the confessional is not come on my podcast and promote your latest project. It's come on my podcast and tell me a story from your life about a time when you were at your worst, when you said or did something that hurt people you love, or that something you deeply regret. And then we have a conversation about it. I'll ask, like, what story were you telling yourself at the time that led you to think this was okay to do? Or, and then we talk about how has that worst moment really made you who you are today? Hold on, I have to grab my dog.
Go ahead.
How the thing that we don't want to tell anyone, the thing that we're ashamed of, that we wish we could hide and it would go away, is so often the origin story for who we became. And I want to honor that. I wanted a space that honored that. And so people tell me they've confessed everything. Chris was on there, Chris Schumacher. So everything from a confession of, I sabotaged my first same-sex relationship because I'd internalized the homophobia from my Baptist upbringing and never dealt with it. And I feel really sad that I hurt that person. Everything from that to I stabbed my friend to death over a 5-pound bag of weed, And then after we have that conversation, it's an honoring space. It's a compassionate space. These are things that if you learned about what this person did in 160 characters on Twitter, you would assess them in a very particular way, and that would be all they are. And, like Brian Stevenson said, none of us are only just the worst thing we've done. And so After that, I go away. I sort of meditate on them, on their story, on the conversation, and then I write a blessing for them. I mean, it's bespoke, it's something that is really just for them, but hopefully also for the listener. And so instead of like confession and absolution, it's like admission and benediction. It's beautiful.
Beautiful. I mean, I think, it describes a little bit of what I heard when you were, when we talked about the trip we did on race, which is that you're in this fear, shame, and then there's a release, and that release is like where beauty and truth lies. And if you're spiritual, you tend to think of that as like becoming a vessel. Like you can be that vessel all of a sudden, and you can be connected in a way that makes you feel alive and useful, useful. I listen to those things. I mean, what keeps coming to mind as you're speaking that? The internet is so mean. It is so mean. It is so sad. People are really nasty to each other. And it's not everybody, and it's not all the time. I get it. But man, are we a culture of punishing each other. It's rampant. And that's how I felt on the road, is like, oh, thank God we're together. And I feel your pain because everyone feels a pain around this.
Well, I think it also is the most sort of extreme voices are rewarded. And so the people who push things the farthest and who are the harshest, most pure in their, ideology and their insistence on blah, 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 and their lack of mercy, like that's rewarded. Yeah. And often those voices actually come from not the most mentally stable people. And so now there's a reward for something that's just not actually healthy. I mean, I've seen, and this is just anecdotal, but the people in my social media feed who are the most like that, it feels like inevitably you won't hear from them for a while, and then they'll come back on and say, hey, I had to deal with some mental health issues. I had, I'm kind of going, are we helping them? Is this good for them that they are being rewarded? And there's this little serotonin boost every time it's retweeted or liked, and it's addictive. Yeah. Are we helping people by encouraging the worst behavior out of them and saying you're our hero for pushing this that far?
Yeah. That is so tough, and I get it. I mean, by the way, the film does a pretty nice job going into this. I read all these books, and unfortunately, I get pretty close to it. I think it's one of these things that is so vastly misunderstood. It's kind of like everyone's a newcomer, or worse, and which
a newcomer to what?
Wait, yeah, I'm sorry for saying that. Basically, when people are trying to recover from addictions and you meet them, they are hurting, like really bad, and they're really raw, and they're not making the greatest decisions. And you get used to it, and get used to it as somebody who's hopefully trying to help them, but at a minimum observing them. You feel that way a little bit when people are on social media. And the other thing I just got to add, and I know this keeps coming up, and I'm sorry to be a broken record, but we got to do something about this. Think of what that does developmentally to a child. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Totally. It's just a nightmare, and if you look at the statistics, particularly amongst young women, suicides have tripled. We're not talking about it's up 10%. We're talking about tripled, right?
Right. Because we're, going to a really pernicious and volatile source to tell us who we are and what we're worth.
Yes.
Not a reliable source, not our family, our friends, the people who are close to us on a daily basis, but we're going to a very volatile source for that. And so when it's good, it feels amazing. Oh my gosh, look, all these comments and all these likes, and and when it's bad, it feels impossible to survive.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a 51-year-old woman who has a fairly stable psyche, and I'm affected by it. I mean, I'm affected by it. What about a 14-year-old girl? I mean, unbelievable. Thankfully, my kids have they're on social media a little bit, but a fraction of what I'm on. I mean, they've never been that into it. They interact with their friends and that's it. So, and my daughter's like, stop tagging me on Instagram, Mom. All these people I don't know follow me. I don't want that. Like, she doesn't want my life.
Well, I am definitely at a moment where I've got to think very seriously about stopping. I have to. And I just sound like such a bullshitter when I say that, because my real addiction is email and text. Like, that's my real addiction. But there's certainly the social media side of it too. And the parameters are the same, meaning like the impulses are very similar. Like the text and the email product. I just got one and had to remove it because it came into my face right here. I got to remove that goddamn notification. The other thing I'll just say about that, and to me, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I do think it is a metaphor for shame. It is a metaphor for these opportunities that you're allowing for people to have. Because, by the way, I really believe this. One of the things I've concluded over the years is that there is no solution without conversation. There is no, self-help really should be about the help of others, because that's where you're going to find your joy. Well, how do you help others? You got to be proximate with them. You got to be with them.
I know. I met Monica Lewinsky at TMP, and she told me that in all the years of people being shitty to her, I mean horrible to her, she said the number of times that's happened face to face, she could count on one hand.
That's sad. It's sad. I hope we wake up to this, because here's the thing, and I want to just two things. One, I want to be clear on this. I don't think all those people in Silicon Valley set up to fuck up our culture, but our culture is definitely fucked up by it. So I'm not saying that their intent from the beginning was a bad one. It may be less true now, because I think they see it and they don't know what to do about it because they have to pay their bill. Just to be clear, they have to keep their stock price up. They don't have to. Let's not get into that debate right now. I just want to say it wasn't one of these. It wasn't like, ooh, we're going to ruin culture.
No, of course.
And that the other part of it is that the reason that they're so good is because the machines learn how to get good. The machines know that Nadia prefers red than blue. They know what you prefer in your feed. They know what you like. The machine knows what you like. The machine knows what you might buy. The machine knows.
Do you know this? Do you know the story about me becoming a fake news story?
I don't think so.
When Shameless, my last book about sex and religion, came out, I did an interview with a gay magazine in Pittsburgh. And again, I'm thinking pastorally. What's a pastoral message that gay men what would feel pastoral for them to hear from a clergy person when mainly we've just shamed them their whole lives, right? And so one of the things I said was, we were talking about pornography, and I'm like, I do not think it's helpful to heap shame upon people about consuming pornography, because what I have found is that people who have a lot of compulsive behavior around it are the people who have the most shame around it. And so if we stop with the shame, the compulsivity really lessens. And pornography is not just one thing. There's feminist pornography, there's pornography that is developed in a much more ethical manner than others. It's not one thing. And so I thought that would be pastoral for them to hear. So what happens? Rod Dreher from the American Conservative finds this article. Why he's reading gay magazines from Pittsburgh, anyone can guess. But he gets this article and he makes a headline for his website that says this. It's perfectly crafted to elicit moral outrage from a certain population. Here's the headline. Feminist pastor claims pornography is ethical. This is the headline. Now, why is it crafted that way? Because there's a whole swath of the population who are going to read that, and he knows it's going to stoke their moral outrage. This is what's wrong with this country. And then what do? They click on it. And when they click, what happens, Tom? He gets money. That's the whole fucking system. And so what happened was his readers were clicking on it, and then other outlets started writing their version of his headline. And then now people who are my readers are coming on my Facebook page and going, Pastor Nadia, I normally like your messages, but I am sorry. I am horrified that you think that pornography is ethical. Pornography destroyed my marriage. And I'm like, well, that's probably not technically true, but moving on. So then now it's spread, and now it's just the truth to everyone. Now this headline that was really formulated to stoke moral outrage is considered to be true by a lot of people. Okay, so I watched the whole thing happen. And then I thought, I got this sick feeling because I'm like, how many times has somebody perfectly crafted a headline to stoke my moral outrage, whether it's accurate or true or not, and I clicked on it and they got money, and I assumed that what they wrote was true. Now, I will not click on something if I do not recognize it. If I do not recognize it as a reputable news source, I will not click on it because we are being manipulated and people are getting rich off of it.
So much of what we see in social media is derived from that, and they're not doing it. They're going on to Facebook and buying the space and buying the demos. Like, they're not coming in with guns. They're coming in using the machine the way the machine works. Like, that's what they're doing.
And it wouldn't work if there was nothing to hook into.
Exactly.
It wouldn't work.
Well, so that...
What is it they're hooking into?
Listen, you nailed it, and it is this salaciousness that attracts. It works. I mean, Glenn Beck said it at TNP. I've talked to him a lot about this. He's like, when I say the really salacious thing, my numbers go way up. I get paid more money. I become more famous.
That's right.
You know, I had a conversation with Van Jones, who I think is just such a nice guy. He's such a sweet human. And please, on the politics, well, hopefully this will. So Van Jones has been part of an organization that's gotten like more than 50,000, mostly men, out of jail, right? And really great work. He gets no buzz about that. If Van Jones has a productive meeting with Newt Gingrich, Twitter explosion, right? Like, you know, people don't care about the good things he's doing. And by the way, I would argue like having a peaceful and loving conversation with someone in the opposing side is a good thing, whereas many people would call that a very bad thing, and it explodes. And it's like, wow.
It's treason.
Say again?
It's treason.
Yes, it's treason.
It's treason.
Yeah. So, you know, so I want to talk about it in terms of your show. And, you know, I'm going to do a quick promo because I want everyone to watch this. I think the world really needs this. But that's the show I'm talking about, The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. Please watch it because I know most of us are so busy and you don't want to read all these silly books that I read. Just spend an hour and a half watching this film, and it'll do so much to inform a lot of what Nadia and I were just talking about. And in the same way, you know, so the way I think about your show and what's so beautiful about the show, and by the way, you said it, but I absolutely believe it. You are doing an act of service in the moment you're making the show. You are also doing an act of service in the moment you're distributing the show. Because those stories are so meaningful. To be witness to those kinds of things, to me, they're the most powerful thing in the world. I always say, like, if you're at a party and like you pass the booze around, it changes the conversation. If you're at a party and you pass a story around, a real story, not who's smarter than the other person, changes everything. So I think what you're doing changes everything. But you're also talking about, and I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but I'd like to talk about it briefly because you know I'm into this kind of thing. You're also talking about taking it on the road. You said you might get a van and do this on the road.
Yeah, I did buy a
You did
van.
buy it. Okay, so good.
I did. No, I bought a Sprinter van, but I hired someone here to outfit it. So it'll be a couple months. But yeah, I do. I want to make it into a mobile confessional booth. I mean, I don't know technically what it's going to look like once I get out on the road, but I know that a lot of people have a lot of pastoral needs that aren't being met. And I have a curiosity about how might I take something on the road and come to them. Also, just... I'm tired of being in my apartment.
Yeah. That, by the way, that I get that. You know that thing, it's funny because COVID was hard in that way, obviously, right? Is hard. I mean, it's less hard for me now because I have some sense of how to move around safely, you know, generally. I found myself getting into the habits of isolation and how destructive that is. And you talked about comfort before, and I just want to outline this a little bit. That isolation thing causes this low-grade pain that turns into a high-grade pain over time. And I just want to sort of invite people to think about, like, I think I can speak for you, Nadia, when I say you don't want everyone to think like, oh, what a great person. That's a great story. Now I'm going to go get in bed and watch more TV. I think it'd be a nice thing if we all got up and said, you know what? I know so-and-so's struggling. Let's go have coffee with them. Call them on the phone. Because you, the individual, your soul will open up. Your life will change. And that's why I'm in a business. You are less so because you use good language. You are good at language. I'm in a business that has these boring terms, community, conversation, no one even knows what they mean. I'm talking about transformative things that if you followed Nadia's lead, my God, you could be part of making the culture better, in my view, I think in your view, and you could make yourself a more happy and useful person, and the people around you will benefit from that. Is that too strong?
I struggle with the same things everyone else struggles with. I mean, that's what makes me a weird, spiritual leader. I'm not an expert. I don't talk about this shit because I have such an abundance of it, and I just need for it to overflow so you can have some. I am talking about this stuff out of a deficit of it and a desperate need for it. My obsession with the fact that I think maybe redemption is possible is that I'm desperate for redemption. So same with the isolation. The longer I am in my apartment, the harder it is to leave my apartment.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, honestly, it feels impossible. But you know what? I'm going to tell you something. This doesn't come out till tomorrow, right?
Right, tomorrow morning.
Okay, so my friend Rachel Kurtz is in town. She's a musician, incredible, Adele type voice. She's absolutely amazing. And she's a single mom, 3 kids, and she's like, if I'm going to homeschool them, I'm going to homeschool them on the road. And so she's going and she's doing these live stream concerts in people's churches when they're not there, and they're live streaming it to their congregations. Genius. And so she's in town, and my father is quite frail, and my parents live not far, a half hour away, and they have been almost totally isolated since this started. And so what I'm doing in 1 hour is I said, hey, I texted my mom. I said, are you around? I want to just drop off a little gift for you guys. They have no idea. It's Rachel Kurtz, and she's going to do a little mini concert in their front yard.
That's
as
a great gift.
So, oh my God. And they love her, and they have no idea she's in town. And it's that brings me so much joy. The idea that I'm going to show up in an hour to my parents' front yard, and Rachel Kurtz is going to sing 3 of their favorite hymns. And you know what I mean? It's we have to think of ways to take care of each other right now. We have to. And it's so hard when we're obsessed with what are our needs that aren't getting met. But I swear to God, and you know this because, you know the 12-step thing. I am served by service so much. It's an escape from my self-obsession. Yeah. And so we have to take turns figuring out how to creatively take care of each other. And I think that's what the road trip is about for me once I get out there, is I need to be taken care of by trying to take care of others.
There it is.
There's my shameless media.
There it is.
Okay, so do you want to know the van name?
What is it?
I hope you get this because not a lot of people will. It's Katerina Van Bora. That's Martin Luther's wife.
There it is.
He helped her during the Reformation. He helped Katerina Van Bora escape from her abbey in a herring barrel. That's how Martin Luther escaped Katie. So anyway, my van is Katerina Van Bora.
Will you put stuff on the outside of it?
Probably not, because I want to be anonymous.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm sleeping, if I'm sleeping in a Walmart parking lot, the last thing I want is for someone to knock on the door and be like, "I've read your books."
So Nadia, I want to outline what you just said so that so we can be clear. In school, I think I'm speaking for most of us when I say that when we talked about service and community service, we talked about it as something you should do, and it probably helps you get into college. I know that sounds cynical, but unfortunately, I think it's largely true.
Totally.
And having had the benefit and the gift of experiencing the 12 steps, I now know it as something that is a gift to me and the people around me, and it actually transforms you. And so when I think of what I'm trying to say is, when we outline what we say are practices, I think practice as service as a practice on a daily basis, conversation as a practice, getting into your neighborhood and your community, that is the self-help book. That is the path to a better culture. Like this is a real thing. And I think, I'm going to guess, Nadia, and you can agree or disagree. I think you have such a beautiful language, right? And I think language that's where it's found. Yes, reading helps. Of course it helps. But in interaction, nuance, learning, being in the culture, that's where it comes from. So like if people want to understand language and be part of language and be part of communicating and being able to receive communications, go be with other people. Like that's where you're going to find it.
I mean, we're having to be creative about that, aren't we? I mean, that's the challenge right now. I wish I'm doing an event called Evolving Faith, October, I think it's 1st and 2nd. And some of the speakers for the event are meeting in Atlanta. And they're going to be together, and some of us are, scattered. And I really struggled because there's nothing that sounds better to me than being with some of my friends. And it's like, I'm not going to go, I'm going to do it from here. And it was such a hard decision. I mean, I feel like we're given impossible choices right now, It feels impossible that I have to choose to not be with people because there's a risk that I might spread something or someone might spread something to me. It feels impossible to say if your loved one is dying from COVID, you can't physically be with them. You can't then, if they die, grieve with other people in an embodied way. It is so fucking unnatural for us to not be in each other's presence right now. And I know we're doing our best and we're being creative and whatnot, but I just, on a daily basis, I just think this is not what we're supposed to be doing. And
well, Nadia, thank you as always. One of the things I want to figure out is how we can be more helpful to you, because you're always helpful to us. So I want to be more helpful to you. And I hope we're helpful in little ways, but thank you for being so helpful. And I know that hopefully, I know that if one person watches this, they will benefit from your experiences and again, I think your ability to communicate those things. And that's as important as anything. I always loved Joseph Campbell. 1, volume, man. The guy read everything. 2, synthesis. He can actually synthesize it and make sense of it. 3, package it, make it useful to us, and then communicate it to us. You need every one of those steps for that to work, and you're one of those people who sees it, synthesizes it, packages it, shares it. What a gift.
Oh, thanks. I never thought of it like that, but yeah, somebody asked, what do you do? When people ask, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a person for a living, I guess. I don't know.
It's so important. It's so important. I was with a guy the other day, and I won't go too much into detail, and I have to go because we have to go, and you have to go. But long story short is, and I'm seeing this a lot more. He said, I'm not very articulate. And we saw this a lot on the road, is that the best things we heard on the road was when someone gave the preamble of, I'm not as articulate as everybody else, but. And then what came after that but was like gold. It was so beautiful.
Gold. Yeah.
But anyway, in talking to this guy, this was like a super spiritual guy. Well, he and I kind of zeroed in on him and come to learn, like, he never went to college. He was ashamed of that and all. But this guy's ability to communicate some spiritual and mental truths to me was outrageous. And I thought, you're totally literate. You're just not in the club of what people think literate means. Well, let's get rid of that. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, and you're a bit like that. I mean, you're actually quite literate in a traditional sense, but the nice thing is you can use language and symbols that sits outside that's where you actually make ground. That's where ground is made. So I'll stop with all the compliments, but I do want to thank you for being here.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful to TMP. I do feel like part of the family. I sort of just self-designated myself the TNP chaplain.
That's what you are.
Father Mulcahy.
Father Mulcahy, yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, everybody, Nadia Bolz-Webber. I'm going to do this at the end just for kicks. The show is TNP Fridays. And thank you, Nadia, for being here. And we'll be in touch.